The Art of Self-Control by Alexander Reid, published by Audiobooks Hub. Preface: there's a quiet kind of power in self-control, not the kind that roars or flashes brightly for everyone to see, but the kind that moves silently beneath the surface, holding things together when everything threatens to fall apart. It doesn't always get the credit it deserves, but those who master it know self-control is the backbone of a strong, steady life. I didn't always understand this. Like many people, I used to think of self-control as something rigid, maybe even restrictive. The term conjured up images of forced smiles, clenched fists, and holding your breath until a moment passed. I believed self-control was about denying yourself what you wanted most. But over time, I began to see it differently. I began to see it not as a punishment, but as a kind of freedom, a tool, a skill, an art. We live in a world of immediate gratification. Everything is fast: food, information, entertainment, connection. The idea of waiting, of pausing, of choosing a wiser path, even when it's less exciting or less comfortable, that feels almost old-fashioned. But it's never been more important. Self-control is not about suppressing your emotions or pretending you don't feel what you feel. It's about learning how to respond instead of react. It's about taking ownership of your actions, even when your emotions are pulling you in the opposite direction. And most of all, it's about keeping your values at the steering wheel rather than your impulses. The truth is, every day we are tested, in small ways and big ones. When someone cuts us off in traffic, when a craving hits at midnight, when we're tempted to check our phone during an important conversation, when we want to lash out, give up, say something we'll regret. In those moments, self-control stands between who we are and who we want to become. This book isn't a lecture. It's not a list of rules or an unrealistic ideal. It's a journey, a human one. Along the way, we'll look at real-life situations, small habits, mindset shifts, and deep truths about ourselves. I'll share lessons learned through both failures and growth, and I'll ask you to reflect on your own path too. You don't need to be a monk or a master to improve your self-control. You just need a willingness to observe yourself honestly and to try, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's where the real transformation begins. What you'll find in the chapters ahead is a practical, thoughtful guide to developing inner strength, staying calm in chaos, resisting short-term temptations, and aligning your life with your deeper goals. But more than anything, I hope this book helps you see self-control not as a burden, but as a gift, a way to build the life you actually want to live, one choice at a time. So let's begin, not with a rigid plan, but with curiosity. Not with perfection, but with progress. Let's explore the art of self-control together. Chapter 1. The first time I truly noticed the power of self-control, I wasn't sitting in a meditation class or reading a book on discipline. I was in line at a coffee shop, watching a man lose his temper over the wrong order. It wasn't a mistake that surprised me. Everyone makes them. It was how quickly things escalated. His voice rose, his face turned red, and he began to shout at a teenage barista who was clearly doing her best to stay calm. And in that moment, I realized something important. This man wasn't in control of his life. His emotions were. That day stayed with me. I started noticing how often people let tiny moments dictate their entire mood. A missed train ruined the whole morning. A snarky comment became the reason to lash out at someone else. It wasn't just about anger. It was about impatience, impulsiveness, overindulgence, distraction, the inability to hold ourselves together when it matters most. We all have triggers, people, words, situations that push our buttons. And most of the time, we're not even aware of them until we're in the middle of reacting. But the real work of self-control starts with awareness. Before you can master your reactions, you have to notice them. This chapter is about that first step. recognizing when you're being pulled by your impulses instead of guided by your intentions. It's about seeing the space between stimulus and response and choosing to pause there. Start by paying attention to your default mode. When you're tired, stressed, hungry, or frustrated, what do you tend to do? Do you scroll through your phone for hours? Do you snap at people you love? Do you eat something you'll regret later? Do you shut down completely? There's no shame in your defaults. We all have them. But when you become aware of them, you regain the power to change. One of the simplest and most powerful techniques I ever learned came from a therapist who told me, you can always buy time. At first, I didn't get it. But then she explained that most poor decisions are made in moments of emotional urgency. We act before we think. We speak before we understand. We react before we reflect. And if we could just pause, just by a few seconds, we could make better choices. That's the secret of self-control. It lives in the pause. Here's how you can start practicing it. The next time you feel triggered, take a deep breath, literally. In through your nose for 4 seconds, hold for 4, and breathe out for 4. This isn't about calming your nerves, though it helps. It's about interrupting the autopilot. When you do this, you signal to your brain, I am choosing to respond, not react. Another method I use is what I call the future you technique. Before making a decision in a heated or tempting moment, ask yourself, how will I feel about this tomorrow? It's amazing how that simple question can shift your thinking. It forces you to zoom out, to think beyond the immediate desire or irritation. Of course, there will be times when you fail, when the impulse wins, when you speak too quickly or act out of emotion. That's normal. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Each time you catch yourself, even if it's after the fact, you're training your mind to be more aware next time. And slowly, that awareness becomes a habit. There's something else important to say here. Self-control is not about suppression. It's not about bottling up how you feel or pretending to be calm when you're not. That kind of control is brittle. It cracks under pressure. Real self-control is flexible. It means acknowledging your emotions without letting them take the wheel. It means honoring your anger, sadness, or excitement, but not becoming a slave to them. Think of it like surfing. You don't stop the waves. You learn to ride them. Emotions will always come and go, but you don't have to let them knock you down every time. Start small. Pick one area of your life where you tend to lose control. Maybe it's snacking late at night, checking your phone constantly, or snapping during arguments. Don't try to overhaul everything at once. Focus on that one thing. Track your patterns. Practice the pause. Ask yourself what you're really feeling underneath the impulse, and then choose the action that aligns with who you want to be, not just what feels good in the moment. Over time, those small wins build trust with yourself, and that trust becomes a foundation for stronger, deeper self-control in every part of your life. Remember, the goal isn't to become someone who never struggles with urges or emotions. The goal is to become someone who knows how to steer through them with grace and intention. That's the first brushstroke in the art of self-control. Chapter 2. There's a moment that comes after a mistake. The quiet space where you either beat yourself up or learn something useful. For a long time, I chose the first option. Every time I gave in to temptation or lost my temper or skipped a commitment I made to myself, I let guilt take over. I called myself lazy, weak, undisciplined. It felt like I was holding myself accountable, but I wasn't. I was just adding shame to failure, and shame never taught me anything valuable. The truth is, self-control doesn't grow in an environment of self-punishment. It grows where there's curiosity. If you want to build discipline that lasts, you need to start asking yourself not, what's wrong with me? But what happened there? This chapter is about learning from your lapses instead of drowning in them. Because setbacks are not proof of failure. They're part of the process. Let's talk about the cycle we all know too well. You set an intention. You're going to eat healthier, go to bed earlier, stay calm in tough conversations. You do well for a few days. Then life throws something at you. A bad mood, a stressful email, a night of poor sleep, and suddenly you slip. One moment of weakness turns into a spiral. You tell yourself, I've ruined it. I might as well give up. And the cycle begins again. Sound familiar? What we don't realize is that this cycle doesn't break through force. It breaks through understanding. Instead of focusing on the fact that you slipped, start examining why. What triggered the behavior? What were you feeling in that moment? What were you avoiding? What story were you telling yourself? Let me give you a real example. A few years ago, I set a goal to wake up early and write for an hour each morning. The first week went great. I felt energized, proud. But then one night, I stayed up too late watching a show, and the next morning I hit snooze 5 times. The next day, I didn't even set my alarm. I felt like I'd already failed. But then I paused and asked myself why I stayed up late in the first place. It wasn't about the show. It was because I was anxious about something I had to do the next day, and I was avoiding thinking about it. Staying up was my way of escaping. Once I saw that clearly, I was able to address the real issue, my fear, and not just blame myself for being undisciplined. That insight changed everything. You see, self-control is not just about saying no to things. It's about understanding what you're really saying yes to when you make a choice. When you eat that junk food, what are you actually craving? Comfort? Escape? A reward? When you avoid a difficult task, are you protecting yourself from failure or just delaying discomfort? When you learn to decode your own patterns, you stop being a mystery to yourself. And when you stop being a mystery, you gain control. This is why self-reflection is one of the most underrated tools in the self-control toolbox. Not journaling in some dramatic diary-style way, but honest checking in with yourself. After each setback, ask, what led up to this? What did I feel just before it happened? What would I do differently next time? Even a 5-minute reflection can change your entire approach. And here's something else. If you've ever wondered why willpower seems so strong one day and completely absent the next, it's not just you. Willpower is like a muscle. It gets tired. If your life is full of small, daily decisions that drain you, what to wear, what to eat, how to respond to messages, your self-control budget shrinks. You have less to work with by the end of the day. That's why routines matter so much. When you automate the easy stuff, when you build habits around your meals, your schedule, your workspace, you leave your willpower available for the hard things. You don't waste it on things that could be solved by structure. Think of your environment as either working for you or against you. If your phone is next to your bed, you'll scroll late into the night. If cookies are always in the kitchen, you'll reach for them when you're tired. These aren't willpower issues. They're design issues. Changing your surroundings is one of the smartest ways to support your self-control. Here's a practice I found incredibly helpful. The day after strategy. Every time I mess up, I pretend tomorrow is a test. I imagine I've been given one more chance to handle that same situation. How would I do it better? What would I say, prepare, change in my setup or mindset? This kind of mental rehearsal makes a real difference. It trains your brain to treat lapses as opportunities instead of proof of failure. In this chapter, I'm asking you to forgive yourself for being human, not in a soft, let all go kind of way, but in a strong, intelligent way. The kind of forgiveness that says, okay, I slipped. Now let's figure out why. Let's grow from this. Let's get better. Because that's what self-control really is. It's not a rigid wall. It's a path. You walk it step by step. Some days you stumble. Some days you run. But every step counts, especially the ones you take after falling down. The art of self-control isn't about perfection. It's about direction. And you're already on the way. Chapter 3. There's something deeply powerful about routines, not because they're glamorous, but because they anchor us. In a world full of distractions and emotional ups and downs, routines are like handrails. They don't eliminate the chaos, but they give you something solid to hold on to. When people think about self-control, they usually imagine it in the heat of a moment. Resisting the cake, not sending the angry text, getting out of bed at 5 a.m. when it's freezing outside. But those moments are just the surface. The real foundation of self-control is built in the quiet, repetitive patterns of daily life. Habits, rituals, systems. That's where your strength is born. It's a mistake to rely on motivation. Motivation is unreliable. It's emotional. It comes and goes, depending on your mood, the weather, how much sleep you got, or whether something exciting is on the horizon. Some days, you'll feel like doing the right thing. Most days, you won't. That's just how it works. But self-control doesn't ask whether you feel like it. It just asks whether you've already made the decision. Here's what I mean by that. If you wait until 6 a.m. to decide whether or not to go for a run, you're playing a dangerous game with your mind. Your half-asleep brain will make the comfortable choice 9 times out of 10. But if you've already laid out your clothes the night before, set your alarm, and mentally committed to the run, you don't have to decide in the moment. You've already chosen. That's the power of structure. It frees you from decision fatigue. Some people resist routines because they feel boring. They want spontaneity, freedom, variety. I get that. But here's the twist. Real freedom actually comes from discipline. When your habits are dialed in, when your systems are working, you're free to be creative, relaxed, and spontaneous in the areas that matter most. You're not wasting your energy on the basics. Let me tell you a story. A friend of mine once confessed that she spent every morning in chaos. She'd wake up late, skip breakfast, scroll through her phone while getting dressed, rush out the door, and feel stressed before the day even began. Her goal was to be more productive and calm, but she never got there. Not because she lacked self-control, but because she lacked a system. So we worked together to build a morning routine that served her. It was simple. Wake up 30 minutes earlier, make her bed, drink a glass of water, write down 3 things she was grateful for, and avoid her phone for the first hour. At first, it felt awkward, but after 2 weeks, everything changed. She told me, "I don't feel like I'm fighting myself every day anymore." That's what good routines do. They reduce friction between you and your best self. And it's not just mornings. Think about your evenings, your meals, your work breaks, your sleep schedule. Are those things serving you or draining you? You don't need to be rigid or robotic, but you do need patterns that support your goals, especially when your emotions don't. Let's break it down practically. If you struggle with procrastination, build a routine around starting, not finishing. Set a specific time to begin your task each day, no matter how much you do. If you tend to overeat at night, create a soothing evening routine that replaces food with something that nourishes your mind. Reading, journaling, stretching. If your phone is eating your time, set screen limits or charge in another room after 9 p.m. Design your environment so it helps you win by default. One of my favorite ideas comes from James Clear, who says, "You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." That's gold. You can have all the goals in the world, but if your daily systems don't support them, they'll stay out of reach. Think about a musician who practices scales every day, or an athlete who follows a strict training plan. Their greatness doesn't come from random bursts of willpower. It comes from consistency. Self-control is just like that. It grows through repetition, through rhythm. So here's an invitation. Take one area of your life where you struggle with control and design a daily routine around it. Start small. Make it easy to stick to. Don't wait for inspiration. Build structure. Even something as simple as a checklist or a reminder on your phone can shift your momentum. And don't underestimate the emotional power of routines. When life gets overwhelming, routines give you something familiar, something stable. They remind you that you have agency, even when the world feels out of control. Self-control, in the end, is less about being tough and more about being smart. It's not about resisting every urge in a white-knuckle battle. It's about setting yourself up to succeed quietly, consistently, every day. The more you can automate the right actions, the less energy you'll waste wrestling with the wrong ones. This is how you turn willpower into a way of life. Chapter 4. Let's talk about emotions, not the big, dramatic breakdowns or heart-swelling moments, but the everyday emotional tides that pull at our decisions. Because if there's one truth about self-control that most people overlook, it's this. You can't control yourself if you don't understand what you feel. For the longest time, I thought self-control was just about being tough. Ignore the craving, push through the discomfort, swallow the anger, smile and keep going. But what I learned after many failed attempts at forcing discipline was that unacknowledged emotions always find a way to surface. And when they do, they usually come out sideways. If you ignore your stress, it turns into snapping at people for no reason. If you bottle up sadness, it shows up as laziness or numbness. If you suppress anger, it morphs into passive aggression or explosive rage. What you don't deal with consciously, you will act out unconsciously. So this chapter is about emotional self-awareness, the quiet superpower behind real self-control. You can't manage what you don't recognize. That's why one of the most effective tools you can develop is the habit of naming your emotions in real time. It sounds simple, even silly, but it's remarkably powerful. The moment you pause and say to yourself, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm frustrated, or I'm lonely, something shifts in your brain. You move from being in the emotion to observing it. And that shift gives you space to choose your response instead of defaulting to reaction. Here's a trick I use often. When I notice myself slipping into distraction or irritation, I ask a quiet question. What's really going on here? Not the surface level story, but the emotion underneath. More often than not, the answer isn't I'm lazy or I'm undisciplined. It's I'm overwhelmed, or I'm afraid this won't be good enough, or I feel like I'm failing and I don't want to face it. When you start listening to your emotional patterns instead of shaming them, you begin to build trust with yourself. This is not about wallowing in feelings. It's about respecting them. Your emotions are messengers. They carry useful information. Anger tells you something feels unjust. Sadness shows you what matters. Anxiety reveals where you feel unsafe or uncertain. Even boredom has something to say. It might be telling you that you're disconnected from meaning. And once you understand the message, you can decide what to do with it. Let's say you're trying to quit a bad habit, maybe stress eating or constantly checking your phone. You've tried to just stop, but it never lasts. The habit wins. Why? Because the habit is solving something emotional. It's giving you comfort, distraction, relief. If you don't find a new way to meet that emotional need, no amount of willpower will save you. That's why self-control often begins not with resistance, but with redirection. You don't just stop the behavior. You replace it with something that works better. You soothe the anxiety in a healthier way. You ground yourself with a breath instead of a scroll. You talk to someone instead of burying your stress in food. The goal is not to feel less. The goal is to feel with clarity, so your emotions don't hijack your actions. One of the most useful practices I've adopted is a 5-minute emotional check-in at the end of the day. I sit quietly and ask myself 3 questions. What did I feel today? When did I feel out of control and why? What would I do differently next time? It's not about judgment, it's about insight. Over time, you start noticing patterns. You realize every time I skip lunch, I get snappy in the afternoon, or when I get critical feedback, I tend to spiral into self-doubt and stop working. These aren't flaws, they're signals. Once you see them clearly, you can prepare for them. You can meet them with intention instead of surprise. There's also something beautiful that happens when you stop fighting your emotions and start working with them. You become calmer, not because your life is easier, but because you've built the skill of understanding your inner weather. You don't panic when a storm hits. You know how to anchor, and that calmness, it's magnetic. It's the kind of strength people feel in your presence, not because you never lose your cool, but because you know how to return to center. One last thing. If you spent years disconnecting from your emotions because they were too painful or you were taught to hide them, don't expect instant clarity. Reconnecting takes time. It's like learning a language you once spoke fluently but forgot. Be patient. Be gentle. The more honest you are with yourself, the more in control you'll become. So the next time you're on the verge of losing it, whether it's yelling at someone, quitting something important, or reaching for an escape, pause. Ask, what am I really feeling right now? And listen. Your emotions won't always be rational, but they'll always be real. Self-control begins with emotional fluency. The better you speak your own truth, the stronger you'll stand in it. Chapter 5. There's a myth that strong people do everything on their own. That if you really had self-control, you wouldn't need help, wouldn't ask for advice, wouldn't lean on anyone. You'd grit your teeth, muscle through, and carry the whole load yourself. But here's the truth most people miss. Self-control doesn't thrive in isolation. It grows stronger in the right environment, and that includes the people around you. You probably heard the saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's cliche because it's true. If you're surrounded by people who make impulsive decisions, who indulge in every urge, who mock discipline and reward laziness, you're fighting an uphill battle. You might still hold a line for a while, but it's exhausting to swim against the current constantly. On the other hand, when you surround yourself with people who value focus, patience, integrity, and growth, something remarkable happens. You don't just try to have self-control, you absorb it. It becomes part of the culture you live in. Let me give you an example. A guy I know used to struggle with drinking. Every time he tried to cut back, he'd end up at the same bar with the same friends, doing the same thing. He told himself he lacked willpower, that he was weak. But the truth was simpler. He was trying to be someone different while staying in the same environment. Eventually, he made a tough choice. He distanced himself from that group and started spending time with people who valued health and mindfulness. At first, he fell out of place. But within months, his behavior changed almost automatically. Not because he had some major breakthrough, but because his surroundings no longer pulled him backward. They lifted him forward. Self-control is easier when you're not constantly triggered. That's why your relationships matter. You need people who hold you accountable, not in a harsh or judgmental way, but in a supportive one. People who ask how your goals are going, who remind you of your values when you forget, who celebrate your discipline, even when it's invisible to others. And it works both ways. When you become someone who lives with intention and self-control, you influence those around you. You set a tone. You show what's possible. Quietly, without preaching, you raise the standard in the room. Now, let's talk about boundaries. If you're serious about developing self-control, you need to be honest about your limits. That might mean saying no to certain invitations, apps, conversations, or habits that drain your willpower. It's not about being rigid or joyless. It's about protecting your focus and energy. Boundaries are not walls. They're gates. You decide what enters your mental and emotional space. It can be hard at first, especially if you're used to pleasing everyone or being nice. But the truth is, you can't pour energy into your own self-mastery if you're constantly leaking into things that don't align with who you want to become. Here's a simple boundary exercise I've used. Write down 3 things that regularly tempt you to break your own values. Then, for each one, create a rule, not a wish, a rule. For example, if I open social media, I set a 10-minute timer first. I don't bring junk food into the house. I never argue online after 9 p.m. These rules aren't about perfection. They're about making the right choice easier and the wrong one harder. That's how you shape your environment to support your self-control. But what about when you can't change your environment? When the people around you don't support your growth? That's where inner boundaries come in. You may not be able to choose your co-workers or your family, but you can choose how much of their chaos you let inside your mind. You can decide to breathe before reacting, to detach from drama, to respond instead of explode. That's a quiet form of strength that doesn't get praised often, but it's one of the purest expressions of self-control. Let's not forget the importance of mentors. Even if you don't know them personally, seek out people, books, talks, podcasts, communities that embody the discipline you want to build. Study their mindset, borrow their strategies. Let them remind you that you're not alone on this path, because you're not. Every day, there are millions of people out there trying to be better, trying to live with more intention. Some are failing, some are succeeding, all are learning, and so are you. In the end, self-control isn't just about you. It's about the invisible web of influence you're part of. You affect it, and it affects you. So choose your circle wisely. Create an environment that honors your effort. And don't be afraid to lean on others as you grow. Self-control may start with the self, but it becomes real in connection. Chapter 6. There's a moment that arrives for everyone trying to master self-control. The moment when nothing is working. You're tired. You're frustrated. You've set your goals, built your routines, stayed away from distractions, and yet you find yourself slipping. Again and again. That's when the voice in your head starts whispering, maybe I'm just not the kind of person who can do this. This chapter is about that voice, the one that tells you you're weak, the one that says you'll always fail, the one that pretends to be the truth when really it's just an old script. If you want lasting self-control, you have to learn to rewrite that script. The stories you tell yourself shape your behavior more than anything else. If deep down you believe you're undisciplined, broken, or incapable, then no matter how many habits you try to build, part of you will always sabotage your progress. You won't believe your own change is real. And what you don't believe, you won't protect. Let's call this identity-based self-control. It's not about what you do, it's about who you think you are. Consider 2 people who are trying to quit smoking. One says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." The other says, "No thanks, I don't smoke." The first person still sees themselves as a smoker, just resisting it. The second person has shifted their identity. They've already become someone new. And guess who's more likely to stick to their goal? It works the same way with any behavior. If you believe you're someone who's always late, who can't stick to a plan, who gives in to temptation, you'll act in ways that reinforce that belief. But if you start identifying as someone who is focused, deliberate, and in control, your actions will slowly begin to align. The key word is start. You don't wait until you're perfect to claim the new identity. You practice it. You wear it like a new pair of shoes. A little awkward at first, but they start to fit. The phrase I often recommend is this: I'm becoming the kind of person who... It gives you room to grow. It acknowledges where you are while declaring where you're going. Try it. I'm becoming the kind of person who chooses calm over chaos. I'm becoming the kind of person who follows through on promises. I'm becoming the kind of person who controls my responses. This mindset creates a powerful shift. You stop chasing change and start embodying it. Now, let's talk about setbacks. Every path of growth includes failure. Every single one. You'll mess up, you'll backslide, you'll disappoint yourself. But those moments don't erase your progress, unless you let shame take over. Shame says, you failed, so you are a failure. Self-compassion says, you failed, but that's part of learning. Let's try again. Which of those voices do you think leads to better self-control in the long run? Too often, we beat ourselves up for slipping, thinking that harshness will motivate us. But research shows the opposite. People who practice self-compassion are more likely to regain control after a setback, not because they let themselves off the hook, but because they don't waste energy on self-hate. They get back up quicker. So here's a rule worth remembering. When you fall off track, don't let it become a story about your identity. Treat it as a single moment, not a defining one. Reset, realign, move forward. It helps to keep a simple tool in your mental back pocket. The next right step. Not the perfect step. Not the huge leap. Just the next right thing you can do to act like the kind of person you're becoming. Maybe that's drinking a glass of water, or writing down your intentions, or taking a walk instead of doom scrolling. One step, one signal to your brain. I'm still in the game. Because here's what you need to know. You're not broken. You're human. Self-control isn't about becoming flawless. It's about building enough awareness, structure, and inner belief to keep showing up. There's a quiet kind of pride that grows when you begin to see yourself as someone who does hard things, not perfectly, but consistently. That pride isn't arrogance. It's dignity. It's the confidence that comes from aligning with your values day after day, choice after choice. And over time, the identity sticks, not because you forced it, but because you lived it. So the next time you feel like giving up, pause. Ask yourself, what story am I telling right now? If it's one of failure, rewrite it. If it's one of growth, keep going. Self-control starts in the mind, but it lasts in the story you believe about who you are. You are becoming someone powerful, someone steady, someone who can be trusted with choices, with challenges, with life. Chapter 7. There's a strange paradox at the heart of self-control. The more you try to control everything, the more out of control you feel. That's because life isn't a straight line. It zigs when you expect it to zag. You plan your day carefully. Then a surprise meeting pops up. You promise yourself you'll stay calm, and then someone says the exact thing that pushes your button. Sooner or later, chaos knocks at the door. In those moments, the real test isn't whether you can stick to a rigid plan. It's whether you can adapt without abandoning your principles. Flexibility is not the enemy of self-control. It's part of it. We often imagine discipline as something hard and unbending. But real discipline is more like bamboo than steel. Strong but flexible. Rooted but able to sway with the storm. Let me explain what this looks like in practice. You wake up intending to eat healthy, exercise, and focus. Then your kid gets sick, or your car breaks down, or your boss calls with a crisis. Your schedule goes out the window. At that point, you have two choices: spiral in frustration and give up on the day, or pivot. Maybe you can't go to the gym, but you take a brisk walk. Maybe you can't stick to your meal plan, but you avoid overeating. Maybe you can't work in perfect silence, but you still chip away at your tasks. That's adaptive self-control. It's not about doing things exactly right. It's about doing the next best thing in a changing environment. People who rely solely on rigid systems often collapse the moment life interferes. But those who build flexibility into their routines, who accept that change is part of the process, end up being far more consistent. This kind of adaptability is rooted in a simple but powerful mindset: progress, not perfection. Perfectionism is one of the sneakiest enemies of self-control. It tells you that if you can't do everything flawlessly, it's not worth doing at all. So you miss one workout, and suddenly the whole week is ruined. You eat one unhealthy meal, and suddenly it becomes a whole weekend binge. That's not logic. That's all or nothing thinking. And it kills progress. Progress says, one slip doesn't define me. Progress says, small steps still count. Progress says, I'm building something bigger than this moment. It helps to think of your self-control like a savings account. Every small act of discipline is a deposit. One skipped workout or late night isn't bankruptcy. It's just a withdrawal. As long as you keep making deposits, your account grows. The balance matters more than the blips. Now, let's get real for a moment. Some days, you're not going to feel like it. Motivation will vanish. Your brain will invent 10 reasons why you should skip the hard thing. This is where another key element of flexible discipline comes in: non-negotiables. A non-negotiable is a tiny promise you keep with yourself, no matter what. It's so small that you can do it on your worst day. 5 push-ups, 1 glass of water, 10 minutes of focus work. These little rituals anchor you. They remind you who you are, even when life is messy. You don't need motivation. You need systems that carry you through when motivation fails. Think of an athlete training for the Olympics. Do you really think they wake up excited every single day? No, but they train anyway, because the goal is bigger than their mood, because they built routines that don't depend on how they feel. That's the level of consistency that real self-control demands, not blind rigidity, but committed flexibility. And here's another truth. Sometimes flexibility means resting on purpose. Pushing through fatigue every single time isn't self-control. It's burnout. Discipline includes knowing when to pause, when to recover, when to give yourself a break. Not out of laziness, but out of respect for your long-term capacity. Your energy is not unlimited. Neither is your willpower. If you constantly drain yourself trying to do everything perfectly, you'll have nothing left when it really matters. So learn to listen to your body. Listen to your mind. Learn the difference between I'm just avoiding discomfort and I genuinely need recovery. That distinction is a skill, and the more you practice it, the better your self-control becomes. Not because you're doing more, but because you're doing what actually works. You are not a machine. You are a human being. And that means your control must grow in harmony with your limits, not in denial of them. To sum it up, control doesn't mean being in charge of everything. It means knowing when to adapt, when to persist, and when to pause. So next time life throws you off balance, don't panic. Don't give up. Don't let perfectionism ruin your momentum. Breathe. Pivot. Find your next right move. That's not failure. That's mastery. Chapter 8. Most people think of self-control as something you use in the moment, when you're tempted, when you're angry, when you're about to procrastinate. And while it is crucial in those moments, the truth is, real self-control starts long before the decision point. It begins with preparation. Think of it like this. If you're trying to eat healthy, the battle isn't at 9 p.m. when you're staring at a box of cookies. The battle was decided earlier, when you bought the cookies and put them in your kitchen. If they're not there, you don't have to use willpower. You don't need a heroic effort. You simply avoid the fight altogether. That's the secret. The best kind of self-control is the one you don't have to use. This chapter is about designing your life so that self-control becomes automatic, not something you have to fight for constantly, but something that flows more naturally from your habits, your surroundings, and your decisions made in advance. Let's start with habits. We are creatures of habit far more than we like to admit. Most of your daily actions, what you eat, how you speak, how you react, are not the result of deliberate thought. They're the product of repeated behavior. You act not because you choose to in that moment, but because your brain has wired a shortcut. This is what we do. That's good news. Because once you understand this, you don't have to try harder. You have to build better habits. You have to train your impulses before they become impulses. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, said it perfectly. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Want self-control? Build systems that make good choices easier and bad choices harder. For example, want to focus better at work? Put your phone in another room. Want to stop doom scrolling? Log out of social media and delete the apps from your main screen. Want to exercise more? Set your workout clothes out the night before. Want to eat healthier? Prep your meals ahead of time so you're not relying on tired, hungry decisions. These changes seem small, almost trivial, but they shift the odds dramatically. They reduce the number of decisions you have to make. And every decision you don't have to make frees up energy for the ones that truly matter. Next, let's talk about friction. Friction is the amount of effort required to do something. If you want more self-control, reduce friction for good habits and increase friction for bad ones. You want to meditate more? Make it ridiculously easy. Set a cushion by your bed, cue up a 5-minute audio, make it so accessible that you have no excuse. You want to check your phone less? Make it harder. Put it on grayscale. Set app timers. Use website blockers. Even small annoyances, like needing an extra password, can slow your impulse just long enough for you to regain awareness. Friction works, not because it makes you morally better, but because it gives your rational brain a fighting chance. It interrupts the automatic loop. Now, let's get into pre-commitment. Pre-commitment is when you decide in advance how you'll act when a specific situation arises. You remove the debate from the moment. It's powerful because it uses your clarity, not your mood, to make choices. Try these simple pre-commitments. When I feel stressed, I will take a 5-minute walk before responding. If I crave junk food, I'll drink a glass of water and wait 15 minutes first. On weekdays, I check email only at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. I never bring my phone to the dinner table. These rules may seem rigid, but they bring freedom. They reduce internal noise. They replace guilt with clarity. And finally, we need to talk about environment. Again, your surroundings matter more than your willpower. This includes your physical space, your digital space, even your social space. Each of them sends signals to your brain about what kind of behavior is normal here. A cluttered space invites distraction. A messy desk invites avoidance. A chaotic home invites mindless habits. On the other hand, a clean, organized environment reinforces calm and control. Take some time to audit your environment. What triggers are lying around, tempting you? What visual cues encourage the behaviors you want to avoid? Where could you insert reminders of who you want to be? Change what you see and you'll change how you act. Here's the deeper truth behind all this. Self-control isn't about constantly struggling against yourself. It's about aligning your life with your values. It's about making it easier to be the person you want to be, not just when you're feeling strong, but especially when you're not. Because there will be days when you're tired, distracted, frustrated. On those days, your systems will either protect you or betray you. Your habits will either carry you or crush you. Your environment will either push you toward growth or pull you toward regret. So don't just try harder. Prepare better. Set yourself up to win long before the moment comes. And remember, the best kind of discipline doesn't feel like a battle. It feels like rhythm, like flow, like a quiet life that moves in the direction of who you're becoming. Chapter 9. There's something most people miss when they talk about self-control: emotions. We like to think self-control is all about logic, reason, and mental discipline. But in reality, emotion plays a huge role in every decision we make. Often, the reason we lose control isn't because we don't know what to do. It's because we don't feel like doing it. And those feelings can be incredibly persuasive. You don't eat that whole pizza because you're hungry. You eat it because you're stressed, lonely, or bored. You don't lash out because you decided to. You do it because anger took the wheel before you had time to hit the brakes. You don't procrastinate because you're lazy. You do it because you're anxious, afraid, or overwhelmed. So if you want to master self-control, you have to get honest about your emotional world. You have to learn how to feel without being ruled by what you feel. This doesn't mean you suppress your emotions. It doesn't mean you become numb or robotic. In fact, ignoring emotions often increases the chances they'll explode later. What you suppress doesn't disappear. It waits, it grows, and eventually, it breaks through in ways you can't predict. So the first step is simple but powerful. Name the emotion. Psychologists call this affect labeling. When you name what you're feeling, I'm frustrated, I feel rejected, I'm afraid of failing, you actually reduce the emotion's grip on your brain. Studies show that people who practice affect labeling activate the rational part of their brain and reduce activity in emotional centers. It's not magic, it's mindfulness. And it leads to a new habit. Pause before you act. This pause is a narrow space where self-control is born. It might be just 3 seconds between the stimulus and your response. But in those 3 seconds, if you're aware, you get to choose instead of reacting. Imagine someone cuts you off in traffic. Your instinct might be to yell or speed up, but if you pause, just for a moment, you get to decide, is this really worth your energy? Does it help? Or is it just emotion leading you somewhere unhelpful? This pause isn't always easy to find. That's why it helps to practice calm when things are easy, so you can stay calm when things are hard. You don't build emotional control in the middle of a crisis. You build it through small moments of awareness every day. And here's a deeper insight. Your emotions are trying to protect you, even when they show up in messy ways. Anger often arises when you feel powerless or disrespected. Anxiety tries to keep you safe from danger, even if it misfires. Sadness helps you slow down and process pain. These emotions aren't enemies. They're signals. But a signal is not a command. You can acknowledge the message without obeying the impulse. A helpful tool here is asking, what is this emotion asking me to do? Then ask, what's a wise way to respond? Let's say you're angry. Your emotion says, yo, blame someone, prove you're right. But your wiser self might say, take a breath, express your needs without harm, protect your peace. That's self-control, not denial, but redirection. Another key idea, create emotional outlets. Trying to be calm all the time without any release is like shaking a soda bottle and never opening it. Eventually, it will explode. You need places where your emotions can move. That could mean journaling, exercising, talking with a friend, creating art, listening to music, going for a walk. Anything that helps your nervous system discharge stress is a tool for building long-term self-control. Also, be careful with the company you keep. Emotions are contagious. If you're surrounded by people who constantly complain, rage, or panic, it's harder to maintain your center. But if you spend time with people who practice calm, kindness, and reflection, their presence becomes a kind of emotional anchor. Self-control then becomes not just an internal skill, but a relational one. Your environment influences your emotions, and your emotions influence your behavior. You can't separate these pieces. One of the most powerful emotional skills you can develop is compassion, especially for yourself. When you mess up, and you will, your inner critic will want to pounce. It'll say, you're weak, you're a failure, you'll never change. But shame doesn't create discipline. It creates despair. Compassion says, you slipped, you're human. Let's learn from this and keep going. And when you treat yourself with compassion, you're more likely to stay in the game. You don't throw away the whole day because of one bad choice. You don't spiral. You recalibrate. Self-control isn't about being perfect. It's about recovering quickly and returning to your path with wisdom and grace. So to sum up, mastering self-control means mastering your emotional life. It means naming what you feel, pausing before you act, creating healthy outlets, surrounding yourself with calm, speaking kindly to yourself, even in failure. You're not a robot. You're not supposed to be unaffected, but you are capable of responding rather than reacting. And that single shift from emotional chaos to emotional clarity can change everything. Your power doesn't lie in suppressing how you feel. It lies in learning how to listen, understand, and respond with intention. That's the emotional side of self-control. Chapter 10. As we come to the final chapter, let's reflect on what we've learned about the art of self-control. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, nor is it about sheer willpower. It's a dynamic, ongoing practice, a journey that requires consistency, adaptability, and, above all, awareness. Self-control isn't a destination. It's a muscle that you strengthen over time, and like any muscle, it has its ups and downs. Some days you'll feel strong and resilient. Other days, you'll feel worn out and human. But it's in the effort, the willingness to return to your practices, your systems, your reflections, that you'll see progress. The first key takeaway is that self-control is a habit. It's built through small, intentional choices made consistently, even when no one is watching. Every time you choose a healthy option, stay present in the moment, or resist temptation, you're wiring your brain for self-control. And these small, seemingly insignificant actions add up to something much larger over time. But habits alone don't build self-control. You also need flexibility. Life will never be a straight line. External circumstances, emotions, and unexpected events will always arise. If you cling too tightly to rigid rules or expectations, you'll inevitably disappoint yourself. But if you accept that flexibility is a natural part of growth, you can navigate change without losing your balance. As we've discussed, one of the best ways to stay flexible is to prepare in advance. The best self-control happens before the moment of decision arrives. By creating systems, removing temptations, and setting up your environment for success, you can significantly reduce the amount of willpower you need. This isn't cheating. This is smart strategy. You're setting yourself up to win, not fight. Another crucial lesson is that emotions are not the enemy. Too often, we try to suppress what we feel, thinking that doing so will make us more disciplined. But emotions, when understood and channeled properly, are a vital part of self-control. They inform us, guide us, and give us insight into our needs. It's not about avoiding emotions. It's about learning how to sit with them, name them, and use them as data to inform our choices. We've also touched on the importance of self-compassion. It's easy to beat yourself up when you slip or fail, but harsh judgment does nothing but erode your confidence and resolve. Self-compassion, on the other hand, allows you to get back up without shame. It allows you to learn from your mistakes and continue forward with greater wisdom. But perhaps the most important thing to remember about self-control is that it's a lifelong process. The goal isn't to reach perfection. It's to continuously learn, adapt, and grow. There will be seasons where you thrive and seasons where you struggle, and that's okay. You're not trying to win a race. You're building a way of being, a way of approaching challenges, and a way of responding to life that aligns with your deepest values. So, what does mastery of self-control look like? It's not about having it all together all the time. It's about cultivating the ability to return to yourself, to choose intentionally, to recalibrate when necessary, and to be kind when you fall short. In many ways, mastering self-control is like mastering life itself. It's about finding balance in the chaos, choosing your responses thoughtfully, and staying grounded in your core values. It's about learning that you're not defined by your impulses, your mistakes, or your setbacks. You're defined by the choices you make after those moments, the ones that bring you back into alignment with your better self. To close, I want to leave you with a final reminder. Self-control is freedom. It's not about restriction or punishment. It's about freedom from reactive behavior. It's freedom from the cycles of guilt, shame, and regret. It's freedom to live intentionally, to act in ways that align with your deepest desires, to become the person you know you are capable of being. When you understand this, you stop viewing self-control as a battle. Instead, it becomes an ongoing, fulfilling process, a process that will lead you to greater clarity, confidence, and inner peace. And above all, it's a process that's always within your reach. No matter where you are on your journey, no matter what obstacles you face, you have the power to choose again. And that, my friend, is the true art of self-control.